Alrighty, I just got through what I think is the worst of the Powerpuff Girls, so now I can finally get to the good stuff. Yeah, this show has plenty of dud episodes, but like I said, if it's got enough good episodes in it, then I could call it a good show. As in if there's more good than bad. Anyway, now that I've gotten all the bad stuff out of the way, this is my version of the top 10 best Powerpuff Girls episodes overall. Ice-Soar. This episode is about Blossom getting her first special power of Ice Breath, and tensions between the girls start to grow as Bubbles and Buttercup become increasingly jealous of Blossom. Gotta give credit to my favorite Blossom-centric episode, especially because she's my least favorite Powerpuff Girl. Yeah, surprisingly, Blossom isn't that much of a jerk in this episode. She's not intentionally shoving her ice breath powers into the faces of her sisters because she's an egomaniac, hint hint.
You're really gonna have to try harder than that.
What the f*** you're saying?
Here, Blossom is just excited about her new power and admittedly does get carried away with it at some points. And Bubbles and Buttercup aren't completely in the wrong either because they're not used to the concept of special powers yet. This episode has no one in the wrong and I actually really like it. So good job, Blossom. I briefly like you in an episode for a change. Don't get used to it. Buttercrush. This episode is about Buttercup falling in love with the Gangrene Gang leader, Ace, and he decides to take advantage of that in more ways than one.
Hey. FBI, open up!
Anyways, this episode is great for Buttercup. It shows that she's a bit of a troublemaker that likes a good dosage of mischief, but at the end of the day, she knows that saving the world and her sisters is more important than anything else. And she also has a soft spot, but when it's butt-kicking time, she knows how to lay a smackdown to any baddie, especially to defend her sisters and her family. Also, one thing that took me a while to notice is that Buttercup only has one line in this episode, and that's where she apologizes to her sisters. That makes her apology even sweeter and the whole episode even stronger. Actions really do speak louder than words. Bubble Vicious. This episode is about everyone underestimating Bubbles because cute little Bubbles, and Bubbles gets annoyed by this treatment and wanting to prove that she could be hardcore. This is a great episode for Bubbles. She's still cute little Bubbles, but make no mistake, she's hardcore as heck and she does prove it here. I know a lot of people have been giving this episode flack for having Bubbles get away scot-free at the end, and I will admit that's kind of a flaw. But I know what it's like to have people treat you like a sweet little girl and think that you're too sensitive to deal with things, and it's frustrating. I also know what it's like to wish you could do anything just so that the other party will take you seriously. Bubbles is my favorite character because I can relate to her, and this will be touched upon later. Even this episode is flawed, I just can't bring myself to hate it. Like your movie sucks said, it's okay to like something and recognize flaws in it at the same time. That's the case with this episode for me. It is still one of my favorites. Three Girls and a Monster. This episode is about Blossom and Buttercup arguing about which way is the best way to defeat a monster, and Bubbles mostly staying off to the side. This episode establishes each of the girls' strengths perfectly. Blossom is the brains of the group with all of her plans, Buttercup is the bronze of the group with her toughness and strong hits, and Bubbles is the heart of the group with her kindness and sweet attitude. Yeah, I know Bubbles is the one who defeats the monster, but honestly, I think that's a good idea to send the message out. Not a lot of people recognize that kindness and being polite is a useful skill. This episode could serve as a little reminder of that. And even though the others don't win in this, there are other times where they do win, which shows that each of them are all equally as important. If you're thinking about checking the series out, then I suggest this be your first episode. the Rowdyruff Boys. This episode is about Mojo Jojo making an alternate version of the Powerpuff Girls called the Rowdyruff Boys, and he uses them to fight the girls, which, at first, it seems like the boys have the upper half. I admit, little 12-year-old me was obsessed with these guys, and boy do I cringe when I look back on those days. Despite that phase, I still like the Rowdyruff Boys, and Boomer is my favorite if you're wondering. Yeah, I stopped shipping Bubbles with Boomer, but like I was saying, I love the fight scenes between these two trios. They bring some great action to the episodes they're in, which is always nice. These boys have also earned quite their reputation. Twisted Sister. This episode is about the girls getting tired of crime fighting and they decide to create a new Powerpuff Girl, but things go wrong and then Bunny was born. And you all know what happens at the end. Anyway, this episode is still pretty good and it's pretty important. By that, I mean it's a huge addition to the story, and while Bunny didn't last forever, she certainly made an impact. I like how innocent Bunny is, and while she does screw up in this episode, you can at least tell how much she cares, even if she is a little clumsy. And her sacrifice at the end just shows that. Bunny's legacy becomes all the more impactful with the ending, and I'm not really opposed to this show touching on more emotional stories. It's a nice change-up. Best rainy day adventure ever. Yes, I shortened that mouthful of a title. Deal with it. Anyway, this episode is about everyone being stuck inside because it's raining, and the girls don't have any crime fighting to do. So they decide to play pretend Powerpuff Girls. This episode has so many great moments. It's got some iconic moments.
Bubbles?
We were playing the Powerpuff Girls, and Buttercup was a monster, and I played the mayor, and Blossom was Miss Bellum. Then Buttercup wanted to pretend she was Blossom, but Blossom wanted to be Blossom, and I wanted to be Bubbles, but they told me I couldn't, and no one wants to beat me.
Some adult jokes.
I'll tell you when you can come. No one tells me when to come.
And overall, it's just a fun experience. Watching the girls play pretend is very likely to take you back to when you were a kid. I know I used to play pretend a lot. So yeah, it's a fan favorite, and for good reasons. Power Noia. This episode is about him giving the girls nightmares that relate to their own specific fear, which forces the girls to face their fears head on. One thing that I love about this episode is that the nightmares each of the girls have are pretty easy to relate to. I'm somewhat afraid of failure, but to a lesser extent than Blossom. I'm not afraid of spiders per se, but I am scared of any giant bug. Bubbles' nightmare, I can relate to hers perfectly. I am afraid of the dark and am slightly paranoid something is out to get me. And the fight with him at the end was epic. I definitely think we could all find ourselves relating to this episode. Although there is one moment in the episode that does always get on my nerves.
What is it? Everything is trying to eat me. Look, whatever it isn't real. Just tell yourself it's not real and it will go away, okay?
Hello?
Stray Bullet. This episode is about Bubbles rescuing a squirrel, and it ends up being really sick. So Bubbles decides to give her a little chemical X, and then they eventually welcome their first animal Powerpuff Girl and name her Bullet. First of all, I love Bubbles and Bullet so much. I love their dynamic. It's so cute. And back to this episode, Bubbles is amazing in this episode. Her animal lover side is going on full force in this episode. And I love how this episode goes for a more heartwarming story when most episodes here are either comedic or action-packed. Although it still has the comedy here.
Squirrels eat nuts, stupid!
And
Yeah, that wasn't my number one in the adult jokes video I made, but I didn't want to put my personal favorite at number one out of bias. And the ending. Oh, I love the ending. It's just a sweet episode all around. If you plan on watching it, get ready for the feels. Aspirations. This episode is about the Gangrene Gang collecting ancient artifacts for Sedusa, and it turns out she was just manipulating them to do all the dirty work for her. This episode is amazing. The first thing I love about this is the soundtrack. It feels like it represents ancient Egypt so well, and it still feels suspenseful. And this episode also has a sense of dramatic irony, but it's done a lot better here than in Little Misinterprets because the girls aren't making a mountain out of a molehill over nothing. And it does teach them a very important lesson, which I will get to in a bit. But the mystery aspect is also done pretty well. The final fight with Sedusa is awesome and probably one of my favorite fight scenes.
I'm gonna tear you girls apart! Who's touching the child?
This episode also has great continuity as it ties into two other great episodes of this series, Buttercrush and Something's Amiss. Yeah, I actually have a feeling that Buttercup is over Ace, but everyone just keeps bringing it up and doesn't believe Buttercup. I sure know how that feels. And the dynamic between the girls and the Gangrene Gang is my favorite thing about this episode. At first, the girls make little jokes about how they're their weakest threat and just nuisances, but it turns out they were the ones making perfect heists all along. This teaches the girls a very important lesson. Never underestimate your opponent. But the Gangrene Gang do prove themselves to be somewhat of a smaller threat. They actually help the girls take down Sedusa, and they seem to be on friendly terms at the end. They aren't redeemed, but it was nice to see that the gang have a heart for a moment. This episode just has everything that I love about the series in it, and is why I consider Aspirations my number one best Powerpuff Girls episode of all time. And there you have it. I've done a list of my favorite and least favorite episodes of the Powerpuff Girls of all time. Now I'm not done talking about how much I love this show. My next video is going to be the top 5 best Powerpuff Girls episodes of seasons 5 and 6. Stay tuned for that video. Also, guys, I am so sorry that I haven't posted in like 2 months all summer. I just haven't really found motivation to make videos and have been feeling really burned out. Only now am I finding the motivation to make them again, but rest assured I have plenty of video ideas for the future. Not just Powerpuff Girls videos like Craig of the Creek, Miraculous Ladybug, Final Space, etc. And I also have another quick announcement. I started a group channel with 2 of my friends called Puff Shenanigans. We do random shenanigans on that channel like play Roblox, watch Reddit videos, just some other fun shenanigans there. So, go check that out. I'll put a link in the description. That's all I wanted to say for now. See you, peeps!